Hi everyone, welcome to YRP Scotland's webinar. My name's Heather Steele. I'm the Networking and Development Manager for YRP Scotland. I'll get that bit out of the way first because I normally forget. Today we're joined by Ed Dymock from BDP, who's the lead architect on the design of Glasgow Queen Street. So today Ed's going to talk about reimagining Glasgow Queen Street Station and the involvement of BDP in that project up to GRIP 5. So Ed will talk for about 40 minutes and then we'll have 15-20 minutes for Q&A at the end. If you have any questions, you can put them to Ed via the question tab, which you should find on the right hand side of your screen, and I'll pick those up and ask Ed and get the discussion going. So I think that's everything. I'll hand over to you, Ed, and we'll get started.
Thank you, Heather. That's great. Hello, everybody. So I'm Ed Dymock. I'm an associate architect at BDP. I've been with BDP for 15 years or so. I led the design of Queen Street, spending around 4 years working on the station in some capacity. I also acted as expert witness on Network Rail's behalf at the TOR's public inquiry. So who are BDP? We are an interdisciplinary design practice working in sectors as diverse as education, healthcare, including most recently the Nightingale hospitals across England, heritage, and of course transport. We were Queen Street's lead consultant, as Heather noted there, to the end of GRIP 4 and architectural lead to the end of GRIP 5, noting that we weren't around to help the contractor on site during its construction. BDP's recent transport sector work includes the Ordsall Cord in Manchester, Whitechapel Crossrail, and one of my personal favourites, Manchester Victoria. So firstly, thank you to the Young Rail professionals for inviting me to tell you something about Queen Street this evening. BDP's Glasgow studio, where I'm normally based, is only a short walk from the station. So as locals, so to speak, we came to the project with a reasonable awareness of its condition and its context and what it means to Glaswegians. But expanding our knowledge of the history of the site was critical in developing our attitudes to the buildings on site. So I'm going to start this presentation by sharing something of Queen Street's history. Bailey's map here from 1782 shows the site as home to Crawford Mansion, a private residence. The building that is now the Millennium Copthorne Hotel was at this time a terrace of townhouses and was typical of the buildings around George Square. George Square itself was a fenced private garden, actually, for use by the residences at its perimeter. Those familiar with the Gallery of Modern Art, GOMA, will recognise it here still as a merchant's house at the end of Ingram Street. Buchanan Street was far from the retail centre of the city it is today, or rather pre-COVID at least. In fact, at this time, the centre of the city is still focused on its medieval heart on the banks of the River Clyde, Argyle Street and the East End. Like many cities, Glasgow's original centre was focused around an easy crossing point on the river. By the 1820s, the city is much denser, and the urban grid is established. Sorry, something funny happening on my screen here. The George Square area is still a residential quarter with tenements and terraces of a classical design, commonly 3 stories. At this time, Cathedral Street, to the north of the site, did not exist. You can see that a quarry actually occupies the northern portion of the site and the land now home to Buchanan Gallery Shopping Centre. This painting by William Simpson shows the quarry and looks south across Rotten Row towards George Square. In 1838, parliamentary authorisation was given for the building of a railway to connect Edinburgh and Glasgow. Crawford Mansion was acquired as the site of the Glasgow terminus. The first station opened in 1842, set behind the buildings retained on West George Street and George Square. The west side of the site was used as the passenger station, entered from Dundas Street, and a goods station occupied the east side of the site to North Hanover Street. Almost nothing of the first version of the station remains on site today, with the exception of the walls of the goods yard and the grain store, which stood in the north-east corner of the site. These form the parapet to North Hanover Street and Cathedral Street. In fact, the imprint of the ridge and furrow roof of the goods station can still be seen on the reverse of these walls, facing the former taxi rank. Steam railways were dirty and smelly. The arrival of the station so close to George Square accelerated a change in character to what had previously been quite a refined residential quarter. This, combined with the excellent link to Edinburgh, promoted a trend towards commercial uses, particularly hotels. By the 1840s, there were at least 6 hotels around the square, including what is now the Millennium Copthorne Hotel, which had been converted from residential use to a hotel by about 1841. Here you can see the hotel prior to its rooftop extension in the French style. In the 1850s, Queen Street was expanded. A chapel on the corner of Dundas Street and West George Street was acquired and converted into the railway company's Glasgow offices. A new station entrance was built on Dundas Street, a screen of arched openings leading to a covered forecourt. In the late 1870s, the station was rebuilt by James Carswell, designer of Helensburgh Central Station and the approaches to the Forth Railway Bridge. The train shed we are familiar with today was constructed, squeezed into the urban block behind existing buildings. The Dundas Street entrance can be seen here. It led to an unusual forecourt with a central column surrounded by a canted glazed roof light. Constrained by the tunnel to the north and buildings retained at the edge of the urban block, Queen Street has always been considered barely big enough for its function. This made it very difficult to adapt to the station. As the city evolved through the 20th century, it's fair to say that Queen Street was left behind. When buildings around the station were developed in the 60s and 70s, the station took little benefit other than some poor quality concourse-facing retail. With the construction of the Millennium Copthorne's bedroom wing, the train shed and the station were effectively lost from view. Of course, around this time, it was referred to as modernisation, but the classical detailing of the Victorian structures were not in vogue and were often concealed as the station was developed. So fast forward to 2013, when BDP first got involved with Queen Street. And I would describe the station that greeted us as a bit of a mess, to be honest. I mean, let's just remind ourselves how bad it was. Here you can see a deck just to the side of, in fact, that's over the cutting to the low-level station. And the image on the right showing the rear of the hotel facing the train shed's fan light. So imagine your first impression of Glasgow. Imagine the international tourist alighting from their train, fighting through the dross and the visual clutter of the concourse, trying to find the city's main civic space. The signage that presents to them puts more value on a burger than it does showing you to George Square. Having wrestled their luggage down a steep, narrow ramp, they then arrive in the shadowy undercroft of the hotel's bedroom wing. Imagine this experience of arrival for those with a visual impairment or mobility issues. Welcome to Queen Street Station. It's not really a welcome at all, is it? And certainly not a welcome to the city. Really was pretty bad. The train shed, whilst never intended to be an urban set piece, was concealed from all but distant views. Only at the north end of the train shed, where it came close to Cathedral Street, was the train shed really visible. Here, however, in such close proximity to the viewer, the rudimentary nature of its cladding and access paraphernalia detract from its singular urban form. The station lacked any civic quality whatsoever. Despite its condition, though, Queen Street, like many stations around the country, is somehow part of its city's psyche. Every Glaswegian has a memory of the station or a story that begins on its platforms. I've had messages from the public who remember getting changed for big nights out in the Superloos, as they were known. In fact, my own stag party began meeting friends on Queen Street's concourse. So how do we change a much valued station, but one that has turned its back on the city, into one that provides a fitting gateway to Glasgow? The Edinburgh-Glasgow Improvement Programme, or EGIP, and more specifically the southerly extension of the platforms, created a once-in-a-generation opportunity to build a station that exudes pride in its city and pride in rail. EGIP's brief was to enhance capacity and decarbonise the Edinburgh and Glasgow route. Understanding passenger growth in the station was therefore critical to designing the new concourse. Bluetooth surveys were completed in March 2013 and demand forecasts agreed with the client. We were required to provide concourse functionality 30 years after completion. This presented a near 90% increase in annual footfalls. Passenger growth was to be enabled by running longer, greener trains on the route. The southerly extension of the platforms, shown here, generated new buffer safety zones that needed to be free of primary structure. This led to the need to remove the bedroom wing of the hotel. To provide a concourse of an appropriate area, Consort House on the southwest corner of the block also had to go. Other buildings were removed to improve connections to low-level platforms. Station buildings on Platform 2 needed to be removed to allow the extension of Platform 1. So essentially, we removed almost all of the station that wasn't inside the train shed. Demolition of both the hotel's bedroom wing and Consort House were essential to the project. However, the hotel objected to the compulsory purchase of their bedroom wing. At public inquiry, we were able to prove that reasons for demolition included engineering safety, network rail standards, and, due to the scale of the project, the public interest. These diagrams illustrate the clashes between the safety zones and some of the existing structures. Clearly, we were never going to squeeze the concourse below the hotel's bedrooms. The spatial journey through the concourse is designed to reinstate the significance of the train shed. Oh, apologies, getting ahead of myself. The overall result is the concourse moves from within the train shed behind a veil of poor quality existing buildings to a new position visible from the public realm. We wanted to use this as the opportunity to improve access, to improve the connection to low-level trains, to increase visibility of the concourse, and to improve visibility of the city from the concourse. But more than this, we wanted to redefine the relationship of the station to the city. We wanted to rediscover the site heritage, to create a space that was legible and easy to use. We wanted to give the station a civic scale, making it, with Central Station, one of the most public rooms in the city. To deliver this, we imagined a new glazed concourse pushed up against the public realm, a welcoming building that provides visibility of your destination, a building shaped by the desire lines of the passenger. The spatial journey through the concourse is designed to reinstate the significance of the train shed. A new glazed facade provides a civic scale on the street edge. The deeply angled soffit then drops to hide the deep roof trusses that create the column-free concourse, actually providing spans similar to that of the shed. In doing this, it compresses the volume of the concourse, which then increases the drama of moving beneath the fanlight. Today, the clerestory window separates old and new and provides new perspectives of the fanlight from the public concourse below. Despite there still being buildings around the train shed, its form is more legible than ever before. The Victorian train shed has an exposed structural skeleton. So not to compete with the expressive structural language of the shed, we wanted the new building to use a contrasting language of surface and material. New flat planes of stone, aluminium and glass visually set off the detail of the train shed's roof structure and its supporting Corinthian columns. The new glass elevation looks to George Square and serves to orientate the arriving passenger, with dramatic effect today. One of my favourite details visible here are the bespoke triangular beams that reduce sight lines whilst mirroring the form of the roof. Their sloping surface is also intended to discourage pigeons to perch. The roof concept angles the clerestory glazing to provide a light touch to the train shed, maximising the amount of light able to pass through the fanlight. Today, the benefits to the train shed of this strategy are self-evident. When arriving by train, the fanlight has far more impact. From the platforms, the angled soffit ensures the new concourse is initially hidden, allowing Glasgow's finest buildings to take centre stage. Only the shadow of the barrier that reduces snow lying against the fanlight is visible. As you exit the train shed, the drama and colour of the new concourse starts to reveal itself. And the impact of the views of Glasgow increase as you reach the gate line. The sloping clerestory glazing that I've mentioned continues around the corner of the train shed down the side of the station to provide daylight above the low-level station stairs. A recent photo borrowed from Queen Street's Twitter account. That's how the same space used to look. The train shed itself, however, was not actually part of the project scope. But from the parts of the structure we could see at the north end of the shed, we knew there was something we needed to celebrate. We wanted to reveal the train shed splendour without doing much else to it. YRP, the engineers, were especially keen not to place any new structural loads on it. This was only possible due to their clever structural design and detailing. It was really exciting actually to see Balfour Beatty peeling back the layers of development to reveal the Victorian structure. It's slightly mind-boggling to think such fine details have been covered for over 50 years. YRP's design allowed the removal of existing buildings that had previously reduced wind loads reaching the train shed's fanlight. This detail shows new lateral wind bracing, offering a helping hand to the underside of the fanlight. We hid this in a bulkhead above the gate line. We then used the same bulkhead to conceal lighting, hide the siphonic rainwater system, and support the customer information screens. The new LED screens located above the gate line have been particularly well received by the public. This photo was taken somewhat frustratingly just a few days before the advertising screens were erected to either side of the main boards. It's worth reminding ourselves what the old boards used to look like. Working with the train shed was not the only challenge for YRP. There was the small matter of building above the low-level station. while keeping both it and the high-level stations open. And the fact the concourse's new roof needed spans similar to that of the train shed. All this had to be achieved with a structure that considered terrorism threat. In fact, I can't really show you the structural models for fear of breaching guidance from the Centre of Protection of National Infrastructures. Needless to say, our EGIP structure is extraordinary in its ability to address so many technical issues while still enabling the architectural vision. I spoke before about Queen Street site being barely big enough for its function. Even with demolition of neighbouring properties, the site was still constrained. We had to ensure every part of the concourse was working as hard as it possibly could to maximise performance. So to achieve this, we aided movement with improved sightlines. We allowed direct movement between high and low level stations. We created generous stairs. We considered the position of the CIS screens and any other equipment that would generate queues, and we moved retail to the sides of the station and located toilets on a new lower floor. The basic area requirements of the concourse were derived by our sub-consultant movement strategies using static analysis, essentially spreadsheets. Dynamic analysis using Legion modelling was then carried out at GRIP 4 and GRIP 5. Network Rail requires such studies are completed for a number of different scenarios listed here. This animation shows the AM peak with most pressure on the rear of the gate line. You can see, I'm going to play that again, you can see the emphasis on movement in a westerly direction derived from the previous Bluetooth survey, and the free movement from platform 2 towards the low-level station stairs. Enabling passenger numbers to increase meant a range of other issues needed to be considered. For example, we ascertained the correct toilet numbers. We agreed the gate line technology, noting that this may change or even improve in the future. We agreed ticket buying assumptions. We worked with a fire engineer to test our ability to increase travel distances and increase the building's population. We also agreed an attitude to retail space with the client. Much of it ultimately will be delivered by a neighbouring project. In an ageing population, access and inclusion issues are increasingly important. Making the building as inclusive as possible was really important to us and Network Rail. Network Rail have an obligation to consider the needs of people with protected characteristics under the terms of the Equality Act 2010. They use diversity impact assessment processes to ensure they meet these duties. As part of this, we consulted with Transport Scotland's Mobility and Access Committee Scotland panel, MAX, Network Rail's Built Environment Access panel, the BEEP, and GAP, the Glasgow Access panel. Some of the resulting provisions are noted here. The main challenge was that the concourse sits between 2 and 3 metres above West George Street. We agreed that offering options for access was best, with a lift, ramp and stair available at different entrances. However, more than this, BDP wanted to make the building look overtly accessible, public and welcoming. So we use the ramp as part of an elevation character that tells you this building is about movement. It allows you to make decisions about how you enter the building as you approach. The ramp becomes part of the architectural experience of using the building, but something for everybody to use. The ramp provides a route for those pushing prams or wheeling cases. Importantly, however, the ramp also helps lower the level of the concourse as it meets the street, preventing a 3-metre high wall appearing at the back of the pavement. By doing this, the ramp improves visibility of the station's activity, as well as putting pedestrian movement right up against the glass rather than people's backs. One area that might be subject to criticism is the apparent reduction of retail in the station. This is purely a function of the space available and our need to prioritise concourse performance to meet EGIP's brief. The reduction in retail on completion of the concourse, however, is in no way evidence of a lack of ambition by Network Rail to enable retail on the site. BDP's previous work with Landsec, owners of Buchanan Galleries, aimed to increase the leisure offers in the galleries and better connect it to the station. Whilst this particular scheme did not happen, Network Rail continued to seek a development partner for the North Hanover Street site. I thought I would touch a little on the technology we used to design the station. The design was developed using Revit in a 3D environment. This allows the use of a VR headset to look at the model. We genuinely use this as a design tool, not just for presentations. This view shows Arup's structural model in red, integrated with BDP's interdiscipline model. The same model can produce some fantastic visuals. And it was also the basis of the animations produced during GRIP 4. A number of changes to the design have been made since this early animation was produced. It shows a large window to the lower foyer. This has since been removed to make space for a substation. Signage at the entrances has developed and the relationship to the hotel has changed. It also shows beams above the gate line we were able to remove with Arup's assistance. The overhead line support structures illustrated here were actually modelled by BDP in SketchUp just for the purpose of this animation, because this was produced prior to their design being, the real design being completed. Views of the low-level station approach, the retail unit, views towards the subway, take up for some waiting room, and the drama of the views to the city. The station now provides a self-evident here in the model. But our design process still uses some old school pen and paper when required. This was a few years ago, so we are more likely to use a digital drawing screen these days, although I don't have one at home, much to my frustration. This sketch explored how the Dundas Street elevation would moderate between the scale of the cut down tenements on Dundas Street to the left of the sketch to the civic scale of the concourse on the right. Much of this is then captured in the Revit model, which is still used to produce the 2D outputs. It's important to remember, though, that 2D elevations are actually a fairly abstract tool and do not really reflect how buildings are experienced in the city context. We considered how the building reveals itself on those secondary approaches, such as Dundas Lane that connects to Buchanan Street, visible here on the left. I love the fact that position of the entrance allows you to see the trains actually from Buchanan Street and vice versa. The Dundas Street elevation is inflected so that the entrance faces towards the Buchanan Street subway. This creates a deep canopy above the entrance. The windows to private accommodations such as staff offices are covered in louvers. Public accommodation, including the ticket office and the retail unit, are not. Again, every time we take a photo, something changes on site. The canopy turns the corner to signal the main entrance on West George Street. Let's just remind ourselves how that same view used to look. It's been great watching the station redefine its relationship to the city. Judging by the number of amateur photographers the station is attracting, I think the public are enjoying that aspect too. So I'm going to finish with some of the photographs that I found on Instagram and Twitter, including this one. It's great to see photographs capturing the quality of light in the concourse, capturing the views of the fanlight and the drama now provided as you look at the customer information screens. The public also seem to be recognising the benefits we've brought to the train shed and the juxtaposition of old and new. And there's some enjoyment of the building's form and materials. And recognition of the character the ramp and the canted facade bring to the elevations at all times of day. My favourite photos, though, are the ones that put the station, the ones that capture the station contributing to city life. Even in a global pandemic, I think it is recognised that the station is starting to do something quite special. It's becoming a fitting stage set for city life, for new memories and personal stories to begin on its platforms. Incredibly, as it's not yet finished, the station this year won a public vote on Twitter to be crowned winner of the World Cup of Stations, from the worst to best station in the UK in just a short 3 years. So I'm going to finish with this slide, which includes a QR code for those with their phones to hand to take a look at our GRIP 5 model. As you scan this, I would just like to take some time to recognise the extraordinary work done by the EGIP team, the current design team, and the contractor Balfour Beatty in delivering the station. When BDP embarked on this project, we knew it would be challenging to keep the station operational during its development, but little did we know that there were other significant challenges just around the corner. So hats off and thanks from BDP to everyone that's contributed to the story of reimagining Queen Street. As someone on social media put it, she's turned out to be a belter. Thank you very much. Heather.
Hi, thank you, Ed. Thank you for that presentation. It's really interesting for me. I moved up about 1.5 years ago to Scotland, so I've never actually seen Queen Street not in a state of construction. So that history of the station and seeing what it looked like before is fascinating. And yeah, what a transformation that's been done. You said you'd been obviously in the area and seen the station before. Was it a project that you ever wanted to work on, or anything that you'd thought of before you took on the role?
Yeah, I think it's probably, I remember actually when I was studying at the Mackintosh School of Architecture, a good friend of mine, Alan, who was the year ahead of me, actually took Queen Street on as his thesis site. So it was very much in, probably all the architects' minds, all the local architects were thinking, yeah, Queen Street would be a cracking project to get. But yeah, so certainly it was one that, I mean, that's true of any sort of site that's sort of crying out for development, and there are a few sort of, well-known sites around Glasgow, particularly some of the Greek Thompson buildings, for example. Some of the churches really do need some, reimagining is quite a good term, because quite often the use has to change in order to attract that investment. I think the nice thing about Queen Street was that it's still a railway station, so you're able to, extend a story rather than sort of change it entirely, which is quite nice.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you touched on this, but in terms of creating a station that works for people, how do you go about consulting with passengers and users and staff and making sure that it's fit for purpose?
Yeah, so that really changes site to site and depending on the station we're looking at. And to be honest, different Network Rail teams take a slightly different view as well. So at this station, we very much relied on ScotRail's assistance for that, the sort of management of that stakeholder engagement. So whilst we met, we were very directly engaging with access and inclusion groups, for example. we had less direct involvement with actual passengers, or for example, cycle lobby groups and things like that. There was very much sort of ScotRail took that on, which I mean, it's a shame in a way, because to be honest, personally, I find that one of the most enjoyable parts of the project. You know, BDP's nature, I think, because we're interdisciplinary, we really thrive on that sort of collaboration. We're used to it. We're not a room of architects working on architecture. We're a room of architects and landscape architects, and you know, in our Manchester studio, you've got graphic designers and structural engineers and building services engineers. So we're very much always trying to learn from each other, and you know, collaboration is very much our kind of sort of ethos. It's just sort of the way we do things. So yeah, I've really always enjoyed consultation with the public, any sort of form of anything that gets you out of the office, I was going to say, but it is a little bit like that. It's just getting out and learning what people want is really exciting. So yeah, so our engagement here was mostly the Access and Inclusion Committee engagement, which, to be honest, was quite a task. You know, there's a lot of people to engage with. You're trying to get national expertise from the Built Environment Access panel, which is now at Rails. You're trying to get a Scottish context from Transport Scotland and their MAX panel, and then you're trying to get local knowledge from the Glasgow Access panel. So it's pretty important, actually. I've learned so much from this process for this project, and the importance of engaging with all of them, because we learned something different with each panel we engage with. And we were using Tom Lister, our own access and inclusion consultant, was on our project team as well. So he was absolutely the right guy for the job as well. He works with the BEEP very often, so he knew exactly what they expected and helped us steer us through the consultation process. So no, I found that all very rewarding, and I'm up for any sort of engagement with stakeholders. It's always fun.
Yeah, I think it's really important with a public building like that it's something that works for everyone, and obviously it's a shame that you weren't able to do as much on the stakeholder engagement as you would have liked, but you bring your own perspective as a local and a passenger of your own experience of navigating the station. Is there any part of the design that you would say is particularly you, or particularly, you know, your favorite bit, or something that you put your own stamp on?
That's a good question. No, I think that for me, the important thing about the design is that it all sort of hangs together quite well. I mean, the canted facade, for example, was debated at great length, whether it could be changed, and actually we sort of decided that the canted facade was part of a sort of style that the station had sort of partly designed by us, partly sort of evolves on its own, but everything seemed to hang together and sort of relate to each other quite well. I mean, I think I can't think of one thing. I mean, I think the views, the way the station engages with the train shed is probably working quite well, and I'm really enjoying the views of the fanlight, the way that's working. So the way the CIS screen is positioned, so that as you're stood looking at the CIS screen, you're now getting that really dramatic view of the fanlight. I think the odd thing actually is that people forget just how much the platforms have extended. You know, that was a huge project in itself. So pretty much all of the station, with the exception of the retail, was all inside the train shed previously, and it's easy to forget that if you look at where the ticket line is now beneath the fanlight of the train shed. So yeah, it's sort of, I think that's a nice thing about the station is that kind of clear story glazing and the amount of both daylight you're getting into the low level stairs, the views you get to the fanlight. I think that element of the architectural concept has come together quite well.
So we've got a question here that follows on. I don't know if it's sorry, let me just see who's asked it. It's not coming up on my tab, unfortunately. It basically, if you were to restart the design of the station now, is there anything that you would do differently? I fully expect you to say no, it's perfect.
I think so some of the things that I would like to have happened differently, probably not within our gift, if you like, and probably not even within Network Rail's gift, and that would probably be sort of things that support it on the adjacent sites. It's a shame they haven't happened, whether it was the land security scheme or schemes that Network Rail have looked at since. I think it's a shame that as the EGIP team kind of leave Queen Street and have delivered this fantastic new concourse, that there's still things around the site, particularly in the North Hanover Street site, that haven't happened. I think that's a sort of frustration for everyone involved. And I think probably, truthfully, COVID's not going to accelerate the delivery of these sort of schemes that need a commercial partner. So that's disappointing. But no, I think we're happy that the scheme has been really impactful and transformational, which is really what Queen Street needed.
I've got another question here saying there were some news stories about how passengers had to strain the necks to view the departure board. Were those complaints valid? With the caveat that personally he thinks it looks fine.
Yeah, no, I would say this. I think you probably stood a little bit too close. I don't know. I mean, it is interesting because the position of the departure board was obviously considered. It's located above the gate line because that's where you need the information. So you want to see your train platform announced and then progress immediately through the ticket gates. At Queen Street, because of the relatively constrained nature of space on the platforms, unlike Central Station, for example, where generally there's more space, they make the train announcements relatively late, and that's to ensure that they maintain a safe environment on the platforms, that there's not overcrowding when a busy train comes in, that the platform isn't preloaded. So it was really important that we position the CIS screen in a location where that information was readily available, and as soon as ScotRail wanted to make that announcement, people could quickly get onto the platforms. So I think it's the right place for the CIS. I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever. In terms of its sort of altitude, if you like, again, I think it's in the right place. If we'd put it any lower, it would have actually encouraged you to stand further forward, and that would have disrupted potential flows for those leaving the platforms. So no, I was disappointed to hear people were craning their necks, but I think as people become more familiar with the station, and they'll understand where the CIS screen is, they'll be looking for that train information slightly earlier as they enter the concourse, and that means that they won't have made it quite so far forward, if you like, and will be naturally happy to sort of linger a little bit further back. So I'm hoping that sort of issue will resolve itself.
Yeah, I think there's always a couple of things that people will find to complain about, and that seems to be quite minor compared to other things that they might pick up on other things. I didn't see those news stories, and again, I've been through and seen the screens, and much easier to find out where you're going than it was before.
The screens are great, actually. Actually, at the time we left the project, we had the money needed to replace the screens was from a separate budget. It wasn't, as I understood it, coming from the EGIP budget. So there was still some question whether we'd be relocating the old boards or providing new boards. So I'm absolutely delighted with the new boards. I think they look absolutely fantastic. So well done to the project team for securing those.
I had a question about the use of technology, and you say that's been coming in recent years. I've heard on other projects that it's been a really, really useful tool at sort of consultation with use or other people who are using it to be able to go and look at something in a 3D environment and actually, finding not mistakes in the design, but things that could be tweaked. And I wondered if there was anything that you'd seen either in this project or another project of that experience.
Yeah, well, certainly pretty much every project we do now is developed in Revit from pretty much from day one. It used to be that the technology moves on, but also so do the skills of our staff. So there's a period of familiarization, but this is all a few years ago now. So at this point in time, pretty much from day one of a project, we're all working in a 3D environment, all working in the same environment as our engineering colleagues and our services colleagues. So I think there's definitely plenty of scope for identifying coordination issues and things like that. And I think that's just part that's sort of always, it's always been like that. I don't think, you know, discovering the need to do some coordination is new to the technology. I think it's just an enabler to help that coordination happen. So I mean, I see it as a sort of really positive thing. I think it does mean you're building a little more time and energy into the front end of a project. So certainly the contractor gets a benefit from that. But I think whether we can, whether we feel that we need more time to build the Revit model, I think that's probably no longer the case. Actually, I think probably now the whole industry's skills have kind of moved on a little bit. I think it's all fairly you know, standard day at the office for this sort of technology, to be honest.
But you say obviously with the front loading, do you find that digital tools like that are reducing risk?
I think they must be. Yeah, I think they are. I mean, you're still relying on, you know, the skills of the architect. If you're looking at something like, you know, whether it's compliant with the building regulations, for example, the model's not going to tell you that. You're still going to have to go and look at the regs, understand the relevant codes, and apply those to your design. So, in terms of risk of, you know, some fatal coordination flaw, then yeah, sort of the Revit model must be helping that. And so does the technology we're using to view it. So the VR headset we have permanently set up in our cafe in the Glasgow studio is, you know, fantastic. You can just grab your laptop, plug into that, and not only look at the model, but sort of you definitely get a sense as you look around the space of how that space is going to sort of feel. And even on a smaller screen, you know, being able to use Enscape and software like that to look around the model, you definitely learn more about the space. It's, you know, akin to looking at a physical model actually. So yeah, it's a very useful tool, but whether it reduces risk, I think that depends on the nature of the risk you're talking about. And something like health and safety, for example, and falls from height, so you would still need to take a sort of agree an attitude to something like protective barriers. The model's not doing that for you, you're having to model the barrier in the design. So where it does help you is help you identify if you've perhaps got a small gap in a barrier or something like that. So in that regard, yeah, it's definitely reducing risk to some degree.
Yeah, it's interesting. You hear a lot about digitalisation, particularly in rail in terms of technologies, but obviously this is happening in industries across the board. And it's interesting to see it from a different perspective, from the architecture side and the collaboration with the rail industry in that respect.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, this at its heart is actually a building project, not a rail project. I mean, obviously there is rail engineering happening within the station. BDP are not, you know, we don't, whilst we're interdisciplinary, we don't do sort of heavy rail engineering. That's not our skill set. So we're very much using, you know, relying on EGIP and their skills for those, that sort of part of the offer. We were a little bit involved in looking at levels around the platforms and things like that. But to be honest, generally, mostly the building, for good reason, is sort of independent from the rail side, which is kind of how it should be. I mean, if we were building over the electrified lines, for example, that would have created a much more complicated interface than we actually had. So yeah, so generally we're happy with the sort of digitalization and all the tools that that's giving us. But yeah, this was still very much a kind of building project for BDP. So in terms of you know, the patterns we're seeing in the digitalization of railways, there wasn't a direct, you know, we weren't looking at signaling systems, for example, or anything like that. So yeah, but it's part of a general shift, certainly, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's a shift across all industries. So I think you said maybe to me earlier, but is this your first railway, first station project?
It is, yeah. So BDP works, you know, all around the world, and you know, we always use the right people to do the right project. So we are very much supported by team, particularly in Manchester, that delivered other stations, led by Peter Jenkins. So Peter would have been the architect for Manchester Victoria and other stations in England. So we're very much able to, pick up the phone and engage with them if we had any questions, how to help us, navigate the GRIP process, for example. But in terms of the design, this was all done sort of in-house by BDP. And yeah, it was our first railway station. So I don't think that was an issue, a challenge at all. I think it was possibly quite helpful actually that we were able to, come at it with a fresh set of eyes.
I've got a question here, more a technical question, saying, did the lengthening of the platforms make it impossible to use the train shed roof as the frontage?
Yeah, so this was something that was certainly considered. So the train shed, and I'll maybe provide a link to an article I put on LinkedIn actually on this sort of issue, because the train shed is such, whilst it was never sort of legible within the city context, the sort of volume of the train shed when you're inside the station is very much, that was Queen Street's character, really. Pretty much all of the station was in that sort of envelope. And barrel vaulted roofs like that, they just shout railway station, don't they? If you see a barrel vaulted roof in the middle of a city, you kind of know it's a railway station. So we're very sort of mindful of that we needed a very clear and sort of a clear kind of relationship to the train shed. However, what we also knew was that we had to provide a new concourse in front of the train shed and in front of the fanlight, and to provide the sort of civic scale that Queen Street needed. It was inevitable that new structures were going to conceal to some degree that the fanlight as it faced south down Queen Street. The thing that is easy to forget is the fanlight is partly concealed behind the hotel, actually. It's in no way, there's no sort of formal, sort of sensible geometry to sort of, for example, to just extend it to the street. That's not really possible. And I would say nor would it be appropriate. If you were doing that, the fanlight itself would become a sort of piece of sort of stage set. It would lose its purpose, actually. So to retain the fanlight, to not touch the train shed, but to provide sort of new perspectives through new glazing was an approach that we preferred, and it allowed a clear distinction between what was old and Victorian and what we were doing. So also the clear story glazing that we created sort of resolved a number of issues on the east side of the station as well. The low level station wasn't within scope, just as the train shed really wasn't within scope. We were encouraged with both of those elements to do as little as possible, but we were desperate to sort of enhance the setting of both. So the low level station, we were able to clear away the buildings at the head of the stairs and provide that clear story glazing above the stairs to let as much light down to those stairs as possible. So our attitude was very much to do everything we could to enhance the setting of both those issues, including the train shed. But no, I didn't feel extending that barrel vaulted form to meet West George Street was going to be appropriate. But it was certainly considered and then dismissed. As I say, I've written an article that covers those sorts of issues, because obviously during demolition, the fanlight was revealed just as it was in the late 60s. And quite rightly, Glaswegians were going, wow, that's amazing, and oh my goodness, the architect's going to cover it up again. But strangely enough, those kind of murmurs have sort of died away now that they can see the advantages to the enhanced setting of the train shed now that the concourse is there. So yeah, it's something we considered and sort of determined or decided not to deliver.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it's nice you talk about the glazing and being able to see that more than you could, but also to have that distinction between the old and new, and the history, the sort of narrative of the station coming through in the design. Even if you're not conscious of it, that's still a perspective that you get.
You saying that, I've just realised, Heather, I don't have any photos of the painted columns in this PowerPoint. So of course, some of my photos are, feel like years old. They're only a few months old, but Balfour Beatty are working so sort of consistently, even through the pandemic, that things change pretty quickly on site. And so since I since these photos were put together, not only is the fan light, I did have a photo, sorry, of the fan light over the glazing over the low level stairs, but the train shed columns have been painted or are starting to be revealed. So yeah, I think people are really enjoying that aspect of it and seeing not just the old being sort of revealed, but being revealed in sort of close proximity to such a sort of contemporary environment that seems to be working quite well.
Somebody's just sent a hashtag plug saying that you'll find pictures of the pillars on pillars on @Network Rail GQS on Twitter, so you can find those there.
Again, hats off to their social media team, absolutely doing an amazing job talking about the building, and I think probably they can take most of the credit for the World Cup of Stations win as well. They were pushing pretty hard with their Twitter account.
It's a really impressive station. Really, like I say, really great for me to see the history of what it looked like before, and I think it is a phenomenal transformation, and that it's a station that Glasgow, can be proud of. So yeah, I think we've not got any other questions come in. I've got a quick question, which would be, if you could redesign any other train station, do you have any in mind?
Oh.
Or if that's too hard, which is your favourite?
It's not hard actually. So yeah, it would have been Waverley Station actually. I mean, there's an awful lot to love about Waverley, but I think it faces some of the same challenges in terms of increased footfalls that Queen Street face. So yeah, I would say that, but I think that that will be a difficult one to get.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that and how it progresses. But it's great to see so much investment and addressing these issues.
It's incredible actually, and I think that's one thing I didn't say. I think we mustn't forget Queen Street is really the sort of figurehead of a decarbonised rail system, or quickly decarbonising rail system, and I think that's really important. If Queen Street does one thing and puts more passengers on trains, play a part in doing that, then it'll have been a success. So let's hope it can.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's an appropriate place to end. So thank you very much, Ed, for your talk today. It's been fascinating. If anyone has any other questions, I'm sure you can find Ed on Twitter and LinkedIn and find those articles that you mentioned. This webinar will also be shared on our Young Rail Professionals platform. So if you want to share it with anyone who you think might be interested, then please do so. And if you're not a member of YRP, then you can always sign up on our website. And I think that's all of the extra plugs from me there. So thank you for joining us this evening. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for everyone who submitted their questions. And we look forward to seeing you again in the new year, hopefully with some in-person events, but we'll have to see on that. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.